Hey everyone. Tonight we begin not with glory or victory parades, but with the sound of boots sinking into wet soil. The year is 1756, and Europe holds its breath as empires sharpen their knives. In a candlelit map room, kings trade continents like cards, sugar, slaves, silver, and souls all measured in miles of sea. Across the Atlantic, a young soldier named Washington kneels in the mud and fires the shot that will echo around the world. Within months, forests in America burn, villages in Saxony crumble, and oceans boil with cannon smoke. The 7 Years' War wasn't just about borders, it was about exhaustion. Men fought for gods they barely believed in, for kings they'd never meet, and for debts they would never repay. It was the first time the world went to war everywhere at once, a war fought in whispers, in hunger, and in silence between volleys. If forgotten wars and unseen wounds keep you curious, like and subscribe, and tell me when the whole world is the battlefield, which empire truly wins. Before the storm truly broke, a quiet unease settled over Europe. A delicate calm, carefully constructed, brick by brick, treaty by treaty. Following the great convulsions that led to the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, a certain understanding had settled into the continent's heart. It was a time when the great powers watched each other with a measured gaze, each empire a piece in a grand, intricate puzzle, designed to maintain a balance of power. This balance was less about harmony and more about a mutual understanding of each other's weight, an agreement that no single hand should tilt the scales too far. The air itself seemed to carry the scent of old parchment and latent ambition, a subtle fragrance within the opulent halls of power and the hushed antechambers of state. At this time, a great maritime empire, Britain, found its strength in the deep, rolling oceans. Its wealth flowed not from vast tracts of land, but from the endless routes of trade, from ships sailing under their banners, carrying silks and spices, sugar and timber from distant shores. The docks of London hummed with a constant, low thrum of activity, a symphony of creaking timbers and the calls of sailors. Far across the waters, its colonies, like scattered jewels, contributed to this immense prosperity, painting the world map with splashes of red, a quiet testament to its far-reaching influence. This was an empire built on the waves, its power projected outward, into the vast, unknown seas. Across the English Channel, France stood as a formidable land power, its grandeur still echoing the glorious, yet costly, reigns of kings like Louis XIV, the sun-drenched palace of Versailles. Though magnificent, whispered tales of immense expenditures, wars fought across decades that had, in their wake, left the royal coffers rather thin. The scent of fine perfumes in Parisian salons could not quite mask the underlying financial strain. A quiet hum of worry beneath the silk and powdered wigs. Despite this, France remained a powerful presence, its armies well regarded, its culture envied, a central pillar in the European edifice. In the heart of Central Europe lay the sprawling domains of the Habsburgs, known as Austria, a venerable empire with ancient roots. For centuries, they had held sway, their influence reaching across diverse lands and peoples. Yet, a quiet wound festered. A source of persistent chagrin, the recent loss of Silesia to the ascendant power of Prussia. This territorial blow had weakened their grip, leaving a lingering sense of grievance, a deep desire to reclaim what had been taken. The mountain passes and old castles of Austria seemed to hold this memory, a silent longing for restoration, for the return of their former glory. Further to the east, like a slowly awakening giant. Russia began to stretch its vast limbs, its reach extending both westward towards the heart of Europe and southward towards warmer seas. The immense, sprawling plains of its dominions seemed to breathe with new imperial ambitions. Slowly, deliberately, Russia was beginning to assert its presence, its voice growing louder in the complex symphony of European politics. Its emergence was a new, powerful note, altering the established melodies and harmonies, a quiet, inexorable shift in the balance. As these great powers maneuvered, a subtle yet profound global rivalry began to deepen, especially between Britain and France. This wasn't merely a competition for European prestige. It was a struggle that cast its long shadow across three vast continents. In the dense, uncharted forests of North America, in the bustling, spice-laden ports of India, and amidst the sun-drenched, sugar-rich islands of the Caribbean, their ambitions clashed. The stakes were not just land or gold, but the very future of global dominance. A quiet, relentless contest played out on a canvas as wide as the world itself, a prelude to the coming storm. The early 1750s settled in with a deceptive quietude. Yet beneath this surface calm, the foundations of the world's empires were slowly, inexorably, beginning to crack. The delicate balance of power, once a source of precarious stability, now seemed more like a tightrope walker's unsteady stride. The competition between Britain and France, in particular, was not merely a diplomatic dance, but a fierce, unspoken battle for colonial supremacy. Each nation saw its destiny intertwined with the vast, untapped resources and strategic footholds of distant lands, a quiet hunger driving their expansion. In the verdant, sprawling expanse of North America, the desires of these two European giants converged and clashed. The British, ever looking westward, saw endless possibilities for expansion, imagining their settlements stretching across the vast wilderness, bringing new lands under the crown's steady gaze. The rhythmic swing of axes clearing forests, the smoke rising from new log cabins, all pointed towards a future of ever-growing presence. However, the French had their own grand design, a vision of connecting their northern dominion of Canada with their southern outpost of Louisiana. This ambition, if realized, would create a formidable, unbroken arc of French control, effectively encircling the burgeoning British colonies. The quiet rustle of leaves in the Ohio Valley, the murmur of distant rivers, were the silent witnesses to these competing dreams, each a potential spark for conflict. Far across the oceans, in the shimmering heat of India, a similar drama unfolded, though with a different cast of characters and a distinct rhythm of commerce and intrigue. The British East India Company, a formidable entity with its own armies and ambitions, found itself in a quiet yet persistent struggle with the French Compagnie des Indes. This was not a clash of kings in full armor, but a more subtle, often mercantile, contest for influence over the rich trade routes and local principalities. The scent of spices, the glint of silk, the whisper of local politics all became elements in this quiet contest, where commercial advantage slowly transformed into territorial control. Each outpost, each trade agreement, was a small victory in a larger, unfolding narrative of imperial sway. Meanwhile, back in the traditional heartland of Europe, the long-standing animosity between Austria and Prussia remained a quiet, simmering ember, refusing to be extinguished. The wound of Silesia, though small on a map, was a deep gash in the pride of the Habsburgs. The icy winds that swept across those lost lands seemed to carry the silent grievance, a constant reminder of past defeat and a powerful yearning for redress. Prussia, under its ambitious monarch, Frederick II, clung fiercely to its gains, seeing Silesia not just as territory, but as a symbol of its rising power, a testament to its formidable military might. The quiet tension between these two German powers was palpable, a low though persistent hum in the diplomatic chambers, promising future discord. Spain, once a colossus of the seas, now stood somewhat apart, its vast empire still impressive. Yet its power quietly diminished. It largely maintained a stance of neutrality, a careful observer rather than an active participant in the gathering storm. The golden age of Spanish dominance had begun to fade, leaving it less inclined to plunge into new, costly conflicts, preferring a more watchful, subdued role on the world stage. Then, in 1755, the quiet tension escalated, moving beyond mere whispers and diplomatic skirmishes. On the vast, blue expanse of the Atlantic, the first tangible signs of the coming tempest appeared. Naval skirmishes, brief, violent flashes of cannon fire and splintering wood, erupted between British and French ships. These engagements occurred even before any formal declarations of war had been issued, a stark and chilling premonition. The sounds of distant gunfire over the waves, the quiet thud of cannonballs striking hulls, marked a crossing of an invisible line. The world, it seemed, was already at war. Even if its leaders had not yet brought themselves to speak the words aloud, a quiet prelude to a global conflagration. The year 1756 dawned not with a gentle morning light, but with the quiet tremor of a world on the brink of profound change. The delicate web of alliances that had once shaped Europe's diplomatic landscape was suddenly, violently, torn apart and rewoven in a manner few could have foreseen. This seismic shift, known to history as the diplomatic revolution, was not a sudden explosion, but rather a series of quiet, calculated moves, like pieces on a grand chessboard being repositioned in the dead of night. Old enemies, whose grandfathers had faced each other across battlefields, now found themselves quietly contemplating shared hearths, while old friends eyed each other with suspicion. The air in the gilded ballrooms and hushed treaty chambers seemed to thicken with unspoken anxieties and new possibilities. The most startling transformation came with the quiet forging of an improbable alliance, a profound realignment of powers that had long been considered irreconcilable. Austria, France, and Russia, three colossal empires with histories steeped in mutual distrust and occasional conflict, found themselves slowly, cautiously, drawing together. Their combined might was truly formidable, a vast, imposing force that promised to reshape the continent. The decision to unite was born of complex motivations, each nation harboring its own quiet desires and fears. For Austria, the primary driver remained the unyielding ache of loss, the deep-seated yearning to reclaim Silesia, a territory that represented both pride and strategic importance. The memory of its seizure by Prussia still stung, a wound that only victory could heal. France, for its part, sought to curb the relentless expansion of British power, which it perceived as an ever-growing threat across the globe. The quiet hum of rivalry, which had stretched from the Americas to India, now demanded a more decisive European response. By aligning with Austria, France hoped to contain its rival, to draw a firm line against its burgeoning influence. Russia, meanwhile, saw an opportunity to further entrench its newfound position as a major European player, its vast resources lending weight to this new, formidable coalition. The quiet rustle of diplomatic papers, the hushed conversations behind closed doors, solidified these new bonds, setting the stage for an unprecedented conflict. In response to this looming threat, another, equally significant alliance quietly took shape. Prussia, finding itself suddenly isolated by the defection of its traditional allies, turned to Britain. The Anglo-Prussian alliance, sealed by the Treaty of Westminster, represented a pragmatic, almost desperate act of survival for Frederick II's kingdom. For Britain, the alliance offered a crucial strategic advantage: the security of Hanover, the ancestral lands of its reigning monarch, George II. With Prussia as a continental bulwark, Britain could focus its immense naval and colonial strength on its global struggle with France. It was a partnership born not of affection, but of strategic necessity, a quiet understanding forged in the shadow of impending war. As summer drew to a close, a sense of grim inevitability settled over the continent. Then, in August of 1756, the quiet tension snapped. Frederick II of Prussia, a monarch known for his military genius and audacious spirit, launched a preemptive invasion of Saxony. This act was a clear, unambiguous declaration, a thunderclap across the European landscape, instantly igniting the 7 Years' War. The sudden movement of Prussian troops, the quiet, disciplined march into a neighboring land, shattered the fragile peace. Dresden, the capital of Saxony, fell swiftly, its opulent beauty quickly overshadowed by the quiet discipline of the Prussian occupation. The Saxon troops, caught largely unprepared, were soon overwhelmed and forced to surrender, their uniforms traded for Prussian blue, their allegiances painfully, quietly shifted. With this single, decisive stroke, the long brewing conflict burst forth from the diplomatic chambers and onto the battlefields, plunging Europe, and indeed the world, into an era of widespread, relentless conflict. The echoes of Frederick's decision would resonate for years, a quiet testament to a world transformed. Long before the grand declarations of war echoed through European palaces, the quiet murmur of conflict had already begun to ripple through the vast, untamed wilderness of North America. It was here, amidst the dense forests and winding rivers of the Ohio Valley, that the first true sparks of what would become a global conflagration were struck. The year 1754 marked a pivotal moment, an event that, though seemingly small in scale, carried immense weight for the empires involved. A young, ambitious Virginian officer, George Washington, found himself at the heart of this unfolding drama. He was a man accustomed to the quiet solitude of the frontier, but now he was tasked with a mission that would thrust him onto the world stage. In a secluded, wooded hollow known as Jumonville Glen, Washington's small force ambushed a detachment of French soldiers. In the sudden, brutal exchange of gunfire, a French officer, Ensign Jumonville, was killed. The event was swift, a quiet explosion of violence in the otherwise peaceful woods, and its repercussions were immediate and far-reaching. This skirmish, a mere ripple in the vast ocean of colonial rivalry, ignited a diplomatic crisis that would soon engulf 2 continents. It was a shot fired in the dense American forests that would indeed echo across the Atlantic, a quiet prelude to a much larger, more terrible symphony. Just a few months later, the young Washington found himself in a far more perilous position. Seeking to fortify his small force, he ordered the construction of a crude defensive position, aptly named Fort Necessity. However, the French, bolstered by their Native American allies, quickly surrounded and overwhelmed the isolated British position. The air grew heavy with the quiet tension of siege, the sounds of distant war cries mingling with the rustle of leaves. Washington and his men, exhausted and outmatched, were forced to surrender. In the quiet desperation of the moment, under duress, he signed a surrender document that, through mistranslation, contained a damning admission. It claimed he had assassinated the French officer, Jumonville. This quiet, coerced confession, a diplomatic blunder born of the exigencies of war, further inflamed tensions, casting a shadow of dishonor over the young officer and providing France with potent propaganda. The very trees seemed to bear witness to this quiet humiliation. The following year, 1755, brought even greater disaster for British hopes in the region. General Edward Braddock, a seasoned and confident British officer, led a formidable expeditionary force deep into the wilderness, aiming to dislodge the French from Fort Duquesne. His march through the quiet, sun-dappled forests was a slow, deliberate advance, a testament to European military might. However, on the banks of the Monongahela River, Braddock's column was ambushed by a combined force of French and Native American warriors. The ensuing battle was a brutal, one-sided affair, a shocking defeat for the British. The disciplined ranks of redcoats were ill-suited to the guerrilla tactics of their adversaries, and Braddock himself was mortally wounded. The sounds of cannon fire and musket volleys gave way to the quiet cries of the wounded, the rustle of bodies falling amidst the undergrowth. This crushing defeat further solidified French dominance and exposed the vulnerability of British forces in the unfamiliar American terrain. The quiet waters of the Monongahela bore witness to a profound shift in power. By 1756, the tide of war in North America had decidedly turned in favor of France. Their strategy was clear and effective. They built strong, fortified positions, creating a chain of defenses that stretched across crucial waterways and strategic land routes. More importantly, they cultivated strong alliances with powerful Native American tribes, such as the Huron and Algonquin. These quiet, deep-seated connections provided France with invaluable knowledge of the land, experienced warriors, and a crucial edge in frontier warfare. The sound of Native American war cries, the quiet stealth of their movements through the forests, became a familiar, terrifying reality for British colonists. As a result, Britain steadily lost the initiative. Their grand plans for westward expansion, thwarted by the growing French presence across the Great Lakes and throughout the vital Ohio Valley. The dream of a quiet, unhindered march across the continent was beginning to recede, replaced by the grim realities of a wilderness contested. A quiet, brutal struggle for control of an entire continent. As the quiet tensions in North America continued to escalate, the European stage became the canvas for an even bolder stroke. A move that would fully unleash the fury of the 7 Years' War. Frederick II of Prussia, with his keen strategic mind and an unyielding will, understood the existential threat posed by the newly formed alliance of Austria, France, and Russia. He knew that to wait for them to combine their immense strengths would be to invite certain destruction for his smaller, though formidable, kingdom. And so, in a moment of audacious preemption, he chose not to wait. He chose to strike. The quiet preparations for war, the disciplined movements of his troops, signaled a monarch ready to risk everything. His target was Saxony, a prosperous neighbor that, while officially neutral, was strategically positioned and suspected of harboring sympathies for Austria. Frederick's invasion was swift and decisive, a quiet, almost surgical strike designed to preempt the full cooperation of his formidable adversaries. The Prussian army, renowned for its discipline and efficiency, moved with a quiet, relentless purpose. This act, though born of strategic necessity, sent shockwaves across Europe, confirming that the whispers of war had now become an undeniable roar. The invasion itself was a calculated risk, a gamble on the part of a king who preferred to dictate the pace of war rather than merely react to it. The first major engagement of this European conflict took place in October 1756 at the Battle of Lobositz. Here, Frederick's Prussian forces clashed with an Austrian army, marking the first direct confrontation of the newly configured alliances. The battle was a brutal affair, a cacophony of cannon fire and musket volleys, punctuated by the quiet cries of the wounded. Though Prussia ultimately claimed a narrow victory, it came at a heavy cost. The field was littered with casualties, a stark reminder of the immense human toll of imperial ambitions. The quiet, solemn counting of the dead and wounded highlighted the severity of the conflict that had just begun. Following this engagement, in a move that exemplified both his ruthlessness and his pragmatic genius, Frederick undertook a quiet, yet controversial, recruitment. He incorporated many of the captured Saxon prisoners of war directly into his own army. Stripped of their former loyalties and compelled into Prussian service, these soldiers found themselves fighting for their former enemy. It was a stark measure, a quiet act of assimilation, aimed at bolstering his ranks while simultaneously weakening the opposition. A practical solution born of necessity in the face of overwhelming odds. As the year turned to 1757, Frederick pushed his advantage, launching campaigns deep into Bohemia, the heartland of Austria. He achieved another significant victory at the Battle of Prague, a testament to his tactical brilliance and the unwavering discipline of his troops. The city of Prague, for a time, lay under the shadow of Prussian control, a quiet symbol of Frederick's audacious progress. However, the relentless pace of war and the resilience of his enemies soon caught up to him. At the Battle of Kolin, a mere month later, the tide turned dramatically. Frederick suffered a crushing defeat, his forces decimated, his plans for a swift victory in Bohemia shattered. The quiet retreat that followed was a stark contrast to his earlier triumphant advance. Despite this setback, and despite the subsequent Austrian counterattacks, Prussia, though wounded and forced to retreat, remained unbroken. The spirit of Frederick and his army endured, a quiet, resilient force in the face of adversity. The initial push into Bohemia had faltered, but the core of Prussia's military might remain intact. The year 1757 closed with Austria having regained some ground and a measure of confidence. But the Prussian king, though bloodied, was far from defeated. The quiet hum of military logistics, the constant preparations for the next campaign, ensured that the war would continue, its devastating rhythm echoing across the plains and mountains of Central Europe. As the autumn of 1757 deepened into winter, the fate of Prussia, and indeed the course of the 7 Years' War, seemed to hang by the slenderest of threads. Frederick's forces, though resilient, had been severely tested, and the combined might of his enemies pressed down upon his kingdom from multiple directions. Yet, it was in these moments of profound vulnerability that the Prussian king's genius truly shone, delivering two astonishing victories that would not only stabilize his nation, but also etch his name into the annals of military history. These were battles fought not just with muskets and cannons, but with wit, speed, and a quiet, unyielding determination. The first of these pivotal encounters occurred in November 1757 on the plains near Rossbach. Frederick, commanding a much smaller force of approximately 25,000 Prussian troops, faced a daunting challenge. He was confronted by a vastly superior Franco-Imperial army, a combined force of French and Holy Roman Empire troops numbering around 60,000. The odds seemed insurmountable, the quiet calculation of numbers favoring his adversaries overwhelmingly. Yet, through brilliant maneuvering, audacious feints, and an unparalleled understanding of terrain, Frederick achieved a stunning victory. His army, moving with swift precision, utterly routed the much larger Allied force. The battle was a whirlwind of movement and coordinated fire, a quiet dance of death that left the Franco-Imperial troops in disarray, fleeing the field in confusion. The victory at Rossbach was not just a military triumph. It was a profound psychological blow to his enemies and a spectacular restoration of Prussia's reputation as a formidable fighting force, a quiet reaffirmation of its military prowess. Hardly a month later, with the echoes of Rossbach still resonating, Frederick faced another colossal challenge, this time against the Austrians. In December 1757, near the village of Leuthen, he executed what many consider his most brilliant tactical masterpiece. His 36,000 Prussians were up against a well-entrenched Austrian army of 66,000. Using a daring and innovative maneuver known as the oblique order, Frederick feigned an attack on the Austrian right flank, drawing their reserves, while secretly shifting the bulk of his forces to strike their left. The maneuver was executed with quiet, disciplined precision, an almost silent movement of thousands of men, hidden by the gentle undulations of the terrain. The result was a devastating Prussian victory, a complete and utter triumph that shattered the Austrian lines. Leuthen was a testament to Frederick's strategic genius and the unwavering discipline of his army, a quiet moment of perfect military execution. These two extraordinary victories, achieved within weeks of each other, did more than just win battles. They transformed the perception of Prussia across Europe. The quiet confidence that had been wavering now returned, not just for the king, but for his soldiers and his people. Simultaneously, in the Western theater of the war, the Allied forces comprising British and Hanoverian troops managed to stabilize their own front against the French. This quiet, persistent effort in the West, though less dramatic, was equally crucial, preventing a collapse that could have severely jeopardized Frederick's position. By the onset of winter in 1757, the strategic landscape had shifted dramatically. Frederick, against all odds, had regained control of Silesia, the very territory whose loss had sparked so much European tension. The news of his triumphs, carried by quiet couriers across frosted landscapes, spread throughout the courts of Europe. Rulers and strategists alike were forced to take notice of this tenacious king and his unyielding army. The year that began with such peril for Prussia ended with a quiet, undeniable testament to its resilience and the extraordinary military acumen of its leader, setting the stage for the years of conflict yet to come. While the snowy fields of Central Europe bore witness to Frederick's brilliance, across the vast Atlantic, a different war, with its own rhythm and brutality, unfolded in the rugged landscapes of North America, known as the French and Indian War. This conflict had simmered since 1754 and would rage with quiet intensity until 1760. For the initial years, the French, masters of wilderness warfare and adept at forging alliances, held a distinct advantage. Their presence an undeniable force in the great forests. The rustling leaves and flowing rivers often concealed the quiet movements of their forces, leading to swift, devastating strikes. From 1754 to 1757, a period of quiet French dominance settled over much of the disputed territories. Their strategy focused on key forts and strategic alliances with Native American tribes, proved remarkably effective against the more conventional British tactics. In 1757, a grim illustration of this dominance occurred with the capture of Fort William Henry. After a prolonged siege, the British garrison surrendered under terms of safe passage, a quiet moment of negotiated peace. However, the subsequent massacre of British soldiers and civilians by French allied Native Americans, a horrifying act that violated the terms of surrender, sent shockwaves through the colonies. The forest air, still heavy with the scent of pine and gunpowder, seemed to hold the echoes of their quiet screams. Before that, the French had also successfully destroyed Fort Bull, further weakening British defenses and consolidating their control over vital waterways. The quiet strength of French fortified positions and their swift, devastating raids left the British struggling to gain a foothold. However, the tide began to turn with a quiet, determined shift in British strategy and leadership. From 1758 to 1759, Britain launched a powerful counteroffensive, fueled by increased resources and a clearer understanding of the challenges of wilderness warfare. The first major victory came with the capture of Louisbourg, a formidable French fortress on Cape Breton Island, which effectively opened the St. Lawrence River to British naval forces. The thunder of British cannons against the stone walls, followed by the quiet raising of the Union Jack, marked a significant turning point. Then, Fort Carillon, later known as Ticonderoga, a strategic French strongpoint, was abandoned by its defenders, denying the British a direct assault but still securing a key location. Soon after, Fort Duquesne, the very site where Washington's initial skirmish had ignited the war, was finally seized by British forces, who renamed it Fort Pitt, a quiet symbol of renewed British resolve. The climax of the North American conflict arrived in September 1759 with the legendary Battle of the Plains of Abraham, outside the fortified city of Quebec. In a daring, quiet night ascent up a steep cliff face, British forces under General James Wolfe surprised the French defenders. The ensuing battle, fought on a narrow plateau, was swift and decisive. Both commanders, the British General Wolfe and the French General Montcalm, were mortally wounded in the fierce exchange of fire, their quiet leadership ending amidst the chaos of battle. Quebec, the heart of New France, fell to the British. A monumental victory that fundamentally altered the balance of power in North America. The quiet, winding streets of the city now found themselves under new command. The capture of Quebec paved the way for the final act of the French presence in Canada. In 1760, Montreal, the last major French stronghold, surrendered to the British. With this final touch to quiet capitulation, major French military and political presence in Canada effectively came to an end. Britain emerged from this phase of the war with vastly expanded territories, gaining control over all lands east of the Mississippi River. A quiet testament to their military and naval supremacy. The vast forests, the powerful rivers, and the quiet settlements of North America now largely fell under the steady, if sometimes harsh, sway of the British Crown. A profound shift that would echo for generations to come. Far from the forests of North America and the battlefields of Europe, across vast blue oceans where merchant ships sailed laden with spices and dreams, another crucial theater of the 7 Years' War unfolded. India. This was a land of ancient kingdoms, vibrant cultures, and immense wealth, a jewel coveted by the rising European powers. The conflict here was less about grand armies clashing in open fields and more about subtle influence, local alliances, and the quiet maneuvering of powerful trading companies, each vying for commercial and political dominance. The year 1756 saw a dramatic escalation. Nawab Siraj-ud-Dawla, the young and ambitious ruler of Bengal, a powerful and wealthy state, grew increasingly wary of the growing British presence and their fortified trading posts. In a decisive move, he captured Calcutta, the primary British trading hub, seizing British assets and imprisoning many British residents in a cramped, airless dungeon. An event grimly known as the Black Hole of Calcutta. The quiet, simmering tensions had finally boiled over, forcing Britain to respond with swift and brutal force. This act of local aggression directly challenged British authority and prestige, setting the stage for a dramatic confrontation. Britain's retaliation was spearheaded by Robert Clive, a shrewd and audacious officer of the British East India Company. In 1757, Clive led a smaller British force, augmented by Indian sepoys, against the Nawab's much larger army at the Battle of Plassey. This battle, often cited as a pivotal moment in the history of British India, was not a clash of pure military might, but a triumph born of political intrigue and quiet treachery. Mir Jafar, one of the Nawab's key commanders, secretly allied with Clive, withholding his troops from the fight. In the quiet chaos of the battlefield, amidst the monsoon rains, the Nawab's army was decisively defeated, its power broken. Plassey handed control of Bengal, with its immense resources and strategic importance, to the British East India Company. The quiet whisper of betrayal had secured an empire. The French, meanwhile, attempted to counter British gains, sending out their own commander, Count de Lally, to India in 1758. Lally, a capable but often impetuous officer, arrived with the daunting task of reasserting French influence against a rapidly consolidating British presence. However, he faced immense challenges. Poor coordination with the French Navy, coupled with the British control of the seas, left him largely isolated. The vastness of India and the complexity of its local politics proved a formidable adversary. His quiet efforts to rally support and resources were often frustrated, his command plagued by logistical difficulties and a lack of decisive naval backing. The turning point came in 1760 with the British victory at the Battle of Wandiwash. This decisive engagement further cemented British military supremacy on the subcontinent, effectively crippling French land forces. Following this victory, the British laid siege to Pondicherry, the main French stronghold and trading post in India. The quiet, relentless pressure of the siege, the dwindling supplies within the city walls, spoke of an inevitable outcome. Finally, in 1761, Pondicherry fell. With its capture, French influence in India effectively collapsed. The dream of a powerful French colonial empire in India, one that could rival Britain's, lay shattered. The quiet hum of French commerce in the region dwindled to a faint echo. the British East India Company, through a combination of military prowess, diplomatic cunning, and a quiet, relentless ambition, had largely secured its dominance over the subcontinent, paving the way for the gradual establishment of British colonial rule for centuries to come. The scent of spices and the glint of gold now belonged, almost exclusively, to the rising star of the British Empire. As the year 1757 transitioned into 1758, the 7 Years' War, already a formidable global conflict, quietly escalated, drawing in more powers and expanding its destructive reach across vast distances. The initial sparks of conflict had by now ignited a series of infernos on multiple continents, each theater adding its own unique rhythm to the global symphony of war. The quiet, almost imperceptible spread of its influence was truly remarkable. From the east, a new and formidable threat emerged for Prussia. Russia, an empire of immense, sprawling lands and growing military might, launched a determined invasion of East Prussia. The vast, flat plains of the region became the stage for brutal engagements. In 1757, at the Battle of Gross-Jägersdorf, Russian forces inflicted a significant defeat upon the Prussians. The sound of thousands of boots on the damp earth, the quiet rustle of their advance, struck fear into the hearts of those living in these contested territories. This invasion signaled Russia's firm commitment to the anti-Prussian alliance, forcing Frederick to divert precious resources to protect his eastern borders, even as he faced threats from the south and west. Not long after, another northern neighbor, Sweden, decided to throw its weight into the conflict, attacking Pomerania, a coastal Prussian province. The quiet lapping of waves against the northern shores now carried the distant sound of Swedish cannon fire. This entry into the war created yet another front for Prussia, stretching its already strained resources even thinner and complicating Frederick's strategic calculations. The quiet resilience of the Pomeranian people was severely tested as the Swedes sought to carve out their own gains. Meanwhile, in Western Germany, French forces, with their numerical superiority, successfully occupied Hanover, the ancestral home of the British royal family. The quiet charm of the Hanoverian countryside was replaced by the disciplined presence of French soldiers. The Duke of Cumberland, commanding the Anglo-Hanoverian forces, found himself in an untenable position and was ultimately forced to sign the humiliating Convention of Klosterzeven. This agreement effectively neutralized his army and seemed to open the heart of Germany to French dominance. It was a quiet moment of despair for Britain, a strategic setback that threatened to unravel their continental strategy and further expose their ally to Prussia. However, as the year 1757 drew to a close, a dramatic reversal of fortunes unfolded. Frederick's astonishing victories at Rossbach and Leuthen, achieved against overwhelming odds, not only saved Prussia from imminent collapse, but also profoundly altered the strategic landscape. These quiet, brilliant maneuvers, carried out with speed and precision, reversed the tide of despair, injecting new hope into the Anglo-Prussian alliance. The echoes of these triumphs resonated throughout Europe, bolstering morale and demonstrating the sheer tenacity of Frederick's army. Encouraged by these victories and fueled by renewed British financial support, the allied Duke Ferdinand of Brunswick, now commanding the combined Hanoverian and British forces in Western Germany, launched a spirited counteroffensive in early 1758. With quiet determination and strategic brilliance, he systematically expelled the French forces from West Germany. The quiet murmur of French retreat, the reoccupation of Hanover by Allied troops, marked a significant recovery. This success secured the Western Front, alleviating some of the immense pressure on Frederick and allowing him to concentrate his remaining forces against the relentless combined threat of Austria and Russia. The quiet ebb and flow of victory and defeat continued, each move shaping the vast, complex tapestry of the global war. The year 1759 settled upon Britain with a quiet anticipation, and as the months unfolded, it transformed into something truly extraordinary. A period that would forever be remembered as the Annus Mirabilis, or the Year of Miracles. It was a year when the long-held aspirations of a global maritime empire, built on trade and naval power, seemed to coalesce into an undeniable reality. Across vast oceans and distant lands, a series of stunning victories, often achieved with quiet precision, decisively tilted the balance of global power in Britain's favor. The gentle lapping of waves against British shores seemed to carry the distant whispers of triumph. The Royal Navy, the silent, omnipresent guardian of Britain's global ambitions, delivered two crushing blows to French naval power. In August, at the Battle of Lagos, off the coast of Portugal, a British squadron engaged and largely destroyed a French fleet that was attempting to escape into the Atlantic. The quiet tension of the chase, followed by the roar of cannons and the splintering of wood, ended in a clear British victory. Just a few months later, in November, the French attempted another desperate maneuver, seeking to transport troops for an invasion of Britain. This plan was utterly thwarted at the Battle of Quiberon Bay, off the coast of France, where a powerful British fleet, braving a ferocious storm, cornered and annihilated the main French fleet. The fury of the waves, combined with the relentless British assault, sealed the fate of French naval power. These two decisive naval victories effectively shattered France's ability to project power across the oceans, leaving the seas, in essence, under British control. The quiet dominance of the British ensign was now undeniable. In North America, the Year of Miracles brought the dramatic capture of Quebec, a victory of profound strategic importance. As we heard, the daring ascent of the Plains of Abraham and the subsequent battle resulted in the fall of the heavily fortified French capital. This quiet, strategic masterstroke effectively ended major French resistance in Canada and secured a vast new dominion for the British Crown. The quiet, winding streets of Quebec, now under British command, resonated with the echoes of a decisive imperial shift. Further afield, in the vibrant, complex lands of India, British forces seized Masulipatam, a significant port city on the eastern coast. This quiet, yet important, gained further consolidated British control over key trade routes and weakened French influence in the subcontinent. The bustling markets and ancient temples of Masulipatam found themselves under new, watchful eyes, a testament to the ever-expanding reach of British power. And in Africa, too, the British flag was raised over new territories. The vital trading posts of Senegal and Gorée, crucial for the lucrative West African trade, fell to British forces. The quiet currents of the Atlantic, which had once carried both French and British ships to these shores, now predominantly bore the weight of British commerce. These acquisitions cemented Britain's economic and strategic hold over important regions. By the end of 1759, the cumulative impact of these triumphs was undeniable. The Year of Miracles had transformed Britain from a leading European power into the undisputed master of the seas and the world's foremost colonial empire. The quiet hum of success, the gentle swelling of pride, resonated through British society. The vastness of its influence, stretching from the dense forests of North America to the spice-laden coasts of India, and from the sugar plantations of the Caribbean to the trading posts of Africa, was now a quiet, yet undeniable, reality. The world had shifted on its axis, and Britain stood at its center, a silent testament to a year of extraordinary victories. While Britain celebrated its year of miracles with quiet jubilation, the brutal realities of war continued to grind on in Central Europe, particularly for Prussia. Here, the struggle was not one of naval dominance or colonial expansion, but a desperate, existential fight for survival against a seemingly endless tide of enemies. The years 1758 and 1759 saw some of the most horrific and costly battles of the entire conflict. Engagements that showcased both Frederick's resilience and the immense human toll of his desperate struggle. The quiet, barren fields of Prussia seemed to absorb the cries of the wounded, reflecting the grim determination of its people. In August 1758, the vast, desolate plains near Zorndorf became the stage for a brutal clash between the Prussian and Russian armies. It was a battle of unparalleled ferocity, a relentless exchange of cannon fire and bayonet charges that lasted for hours under a hot summer sun. The air grew thick with smoke and the quiet groans of suffering. Both sides fought with a savage intensity, neither willing to yield an inch of ground. When the fighting finally ceased, the field was a scene of utter devastation. Over 30,000 casualties lay scattered across the landscape, a stark testament to the barbarity of the conflict. Despite the immense losses, neither side could claim a clear victor. It was a draw, a Pyrrhic struggle that left both armies bleeding and exhausted. A quiet, horrifying stalemate that underscored the immense cost of the war. The following year, 1759, brought an even greater disaster for Frederick and his Prussians. In August, at the Battle of Kunersdorf, Frederick's army faced a combined force of Russian and Austrian troops. What unfolded was a catastrophic defeat, a crushing blow that pushed Prussia to the very brink of collapse. Frederick, known for his tactical brilliance, made a series of miscalculations, and his army, though fighting bravely, was utterly overwhelmed. The Prussian forces suffered devastating losses, with nearly 19,000 men killed, wounded, or captured. The quiet terror of retreat, the desperate flight from a shattered battlefield, marked a moment of profound despair. Following Kunersdorf, Berlin, the capital of Prussia, lay exposed and vulnerable, its quiet streets now facing the terrifying prospect of enemy occupation. Frederick himself, contemplating suicide, believed his kingdom was lost, its fate sealed by this brutal defeat. The quiet whispers of surrender began to circulate in his exhausted mind. However, a series of unlikely events, often attributed to divine intervention by those who observed it, came to Prussia's rescue. The victorious Russian and Austrian commanders, failing to coordinate their movements effectively, hesitated. The quiet discord between them, the lack of a decisive, unified push, bought Frederick precious time. This unexpected reprieve, this inexplicable pause in the enemy's advance, became known as the first miracle of the House of Brandenburg. Thanks to this miracle, Prussia, though battered and bleeding, managed to survive another year. Frederick, though deeply shaken by the experience, began the slow, painful process of rebuilding his shattered army. The quiet sound of recruitment, the diligent work of his officers, slowly brought new life into his depleted ranks. The defeats at Zorndorf and Kunersdorf were stark reminders of the immense and constant pressure Frederick faced. But they also highlighted his extraordinary resilience and the sheer tenacity of his kingdom. The quiet resolve to continue, even in the face of such overwhelming adversity, was a defining characteristic of this brutal, grinding war. As Frederick the Great battled for the very existence of Prussia in the brutal heart of Central Europe, a quieter, yet equally vital, struggle unfolded on the Western Front. Here, the Anglo-German forces under the command of Duke Ferdinand of Brunswick provided a crucial anchor, absorbing French pressure and denying them significant gains. Their efforts, though often overshadowed by the more dramatic engagements to the east, were instrumental in maintaining the overall balance of the war and allowing Frederick to focus his desperate struggles. The quiet, disciplined movements of these Western forces held a strategic weight that resonated across the continent. From 1758 to 1759, Duke Ferdinand demonstrated his strategic acumen, leading a successful campaign to recapture Hanover. The quiet murmur of French retreat, the return of familiar flags to the region, marked a significant morale booster for the Allied cause. This quiet, persistent effort pushed French forces back, securing a crucial buffer zone against their incursions into the German states. The fertile lands of Hanover, once under French occupation, now breathed a quiet sigh of relief under the protection of Ferdinand's command. The pinnacle of the Western Front's efforts came in August 1759 at the Battle of Minden. Here, a combined Anglo-German army, though numerically inferior, delivered a stunning defeat to a superior French force. The battle was marked by exceptional discipline and coordination, particularly by the British infantry. The quiet, unwavering advance of their lines, even in the face of heavy fire, broke the French resolve. Minden was a decisive victory that not only solidified the Western Front, but also further demonstrated the effectiveness of the Anglo-German alliance. This success effectively secured the region, freeing Frederick from the constant worry of a French breakthrough in the West and allowing him to concentrate his depleted resources on the dire threats posed by Austria and Russia. The quiet assurance of a stable Western flank was a profound comfort to the embattled Prussian king. However, even with the Western Front stabilized, the exhaustion of prolonged warfare was beginning to tell on all sides. The year 1760 brought new challenges and quiet desperation. Austrians and Russians, sensing Prussia's profound weakness after Kunersdorf, launched a bold raid on Berlin. The capital, once seemingly secure, was briefly occupied, its quiet streets filled with the unfamiliar sounds of enemy soldiers. This quiet humiliation, though short-lived, underscored the perilous situation in which Prussia found itself. Frederick, despite facing overwhelming odds, was not one to yield easily. He struck back, engaging the Austrians in October at the Battle of Torgau. This battle, one of the bloodiest of the war, saw Frederick himself wounded. But his forces ultimately prevailed, albeit at a terrible cost. The quiet, mournful counting of the dead after Torgau reflected the weariness on all sides. By the end of 1760, the long years of conflict had taken a profound toll on every combatant. The vast armies, the intricate logistics, the immense financial expenditures all had pushed nations to their limits. The quiet desperation began to settle in, a heavy cloak over the continent. The initial fervor of war had been replaced by a grim, bone-deep exhaustion. The sounds of distant cannon fire, though still present, now carried a note of weariness, a quiet longing for an end to the ceaseless struggle. a deep desire for the return of a fragile, uncertain peace. As the calendar turned to 1761, the relentless rhythm of the 7 Years' War had taken a profound toll on all combatants. The initial grand ambitions and strategic maneuvers had given way to a quiet, grinding war of attrition, marked by exhaustion, dwindling resources, and a palpable weariness across the battlefields and in the capitals of Europe. The very air seemed to carry the scent of fatigue, a pervasive sense of profound tiredness. For Prussia, the situation was particularly dire. The vast Russian armies, relentless in their slow, inexorable advance, managed to capture Kolberg, a vital port on the Baltic Sea. This was a significant strategic loss, cutting Prussia off from direct access to the Baltic and further isolating Frederick's kingdom. The quiet hum of trade from the sea now ceased, replaced by the grim realities of blockade. Frederick, whose earlier campaigns had been characterized by audacious offensive maneuvers, was now forced into a quiet, desperate defensive warfare. His armies, though still disciplined, were depleted. His resources, stretched thin by years of conflict, were dwindling. Shortages of men, money, and materiel became a constant, gnawing concern. The quiet rustle of empty supply wagons, the visible weariness on the faces of his soldiers, spoke volumes of the immense strain. In Britain, too, changes were afoot. In 1760, King George II, a monarch who had seen the rise of the war, passed away quietly. His grandson, George III, ascended to the throne, bringing with him a new perspective and a growing desire to extricate Britain from the expensive continental entanglements, while he continued the crucial financial subsidies to Prussia, which were truly its lifeline. George III harbored a strong inclination towards peace. The quiet discussions in the royal court now revolved around ending the conflict, a yearning for stability after years of relentless campaigning. The immense cost of the war, though bringing global gains, was becoming a heavy burden on the British Treasury, echoing the quiet anxiety among its people. The year 1761 saw Austria and Russia, despite their own weariness, pressing Prussia relentlessly. Their forces continued their slow, steady advance, seeking to finally deliver the decisive blow that would shatter Frederick's kingdom. The quiet, persistent pressure was immense, a constant threat that loomed over every Prussian position. Yet, despite their overwhelming numerical superiority and the palpable exhaustion within the Prussian ranks, they repeatedly failed to land the final, crushing strike. Their coordination was often imperfect, their strategic resolve sometimes wavering, allowing Frederick's desperate defenses to hold. Prussia, against all odds, managed to barely hold on. This remarkable endurance was largely due to two critical factors. Firstly, the unwavering, albeit expensive, British financing, which kept the Prussian war machine from collapsing entirely. The quiet flow of gold across borders was as vital as any troop movement. Secondly, it was the sheer, unyielding discipline of the Prussian army and the indomitable will of Frederick himself. These men, though physically and mentally exhausted, fought with a quiet, desperate courage, driven by loyalty and a fierce determination to protect their homeland. The quiet, grim resolve in their eyes, the relentless training, the constant drilling all contributed to their incredible resilience. The year concluded with Prussia hanging by a thread, but still unbroken, a quiet testament to a kingdom that refused to yield, even in the deepest shadows of exhaustion. just as the shadow of exhaustion seemed to completely engulf Prussia, poised to extinguish its defiant spirit. A sudden, unexpected twist of fate intervened. It was a moment so dramatic, so timely, that it became known as the second miracle of the House of Brandenburg. A quiet, almost unbelievable reprieve that completely transformed the course of the war. The whispers of despair that had permeated Frederick's court abruptly gave way to a fragile, cautious hope. A testament to the unpredictable nature of history and the quiet, potent power of circumstance. In January 1762, the news arrived from Russia, carried by quiet, urgent couriers, that Empress Elizabeth had passed away. Her death was a significant event in itself, but its immediate impact on the war was nothing short of revolutionary. Her successor, Peter III, was a fervent admirer of Frederick the Great and all things Prussian. This sudden change in leadership immediately and dramatically altered Russia's allegiance. Peter, with almost reckless speed, withdrew Russia from the war, pulling his vast armies out of Prussian territory. The quiet, almost miraculous, retreat of the formidable Russian forces was a profound relief for the embattled Prussians, a weight lifted from their collective shoulders. Not only did Russia withdraw, but Peter III went further, signing a peace treaty with Prussia. This act, unthinkable just months earlier, effectively dissolved the Eastern Front that had so relentlessly bled Prussia dry. The quiet sounds of peace treaties being signed, the rustle of official documents, replaced the thunder of cannons almost immediately. Sweden, which had joined the war largely at Russia's instigation, also exited the conflict, making its own peace with Prussia. With these two sudden withdrawals, the northern fronts, which had stretched Prussia to its breaking point, simply dissolved, leaving Frederick with an unprecedented strategic advantage, the ability to concentrate his remaining forces against Austria, his most persistent and now isolated enemy. The quiet calm that settled over these former battlefields was almost eerie in its suddenness. Seizing this incredible opportunity, Frederick, reinvigorated by this unexpected turn of events, launched a counterattack against Austria. His army, though still smaller than Austria's, now fought with renewed purpose and a quiet surge of hope. In October 1762, at the Battle of Freiburg, Frederick's Prussians achieved a decisive victory over the Austrians. It was a hard-fought battle, but the momentum of the second miracle seemed to carry them through. The quiet shouts of victory, the raising of the Prussian flag, signaled a profound shift in the fortunes of war. The second miracle of the House of Brandenburg truly saved the Kingdom of Prussia from utter annihilation. It allowed Frederick to emerge from a position of near certain defeat to one of relative strength, ensuring the survival and eventual rise of his nation. The quiet, unyielding spirit of Prussia, combined with this extraordinary stroke of luck, guaranteed its place as a significant power in Central Europe, forever altering the geopolitical landscape and paving the way for the treaties that would formally end the brutal global conflict. As the second miracle of Prussia was quietly unfolding, bringing an unexpected reprieve in Central Europe, the global nature of the 7 Years' War continued to expand, drawing in new powers and shifting alliances even as others sought peace. In a move that promised to further complicate Britain's already vast military commitments, the House of Bourbon, spanning France and Spain, sought to strengthen its familial bonds and challenge British global dominance. This quiet, strategic alignment would unleash a new wave of conflict on distant, sun-drenched shores. In 1761, King Charles III of Spain, a monarch deeply concerned by Britain's burgeoning power and its unprecedented successes, made a pivotal decision. He signed the family compact with France, a formal agreement that solidified the alliance between the two Bourbon kingdoms. This compact was more than just a diplomatic handshake. It was a commitment to mutual defense and a shared opposition to British imperial ambitions. The quiet rustle of official documents, the solemn vows exchanged between monarchs, set the stage for Spain's entry into the global conflict. Charles III hoped that a united Bourbon front could tip the scales against Britain, which he perceived as an increasingly dangerous rival. Britain, always vigilant and quick to react to perceived threats to its global supremacy, understood the implications of this new alliance. Recognizing that Spain's entry into the war was now almost inevitable, and preferring to act on its own terms rather than wait for a Spanish declaration, Britain preemptively declared war on Spain in 1762. This quiet, calculated decision by the British government demonstrated their resolve to confront any challenges to their rising power, no matter how formidable the new alliance appeared. The consequences for Spain were immediate and devastating, revealing the quiet power of Britain's naval might. British forces, with their superior fleet and experienced troops, launched daring expeditions against key Spanish colonial strongholds. One of the most significant blows came with the capture of Havana, the richly fortified capital of Cuba. After a 2-month siege, a grueling struggle against formidable defenses and tropical disease, British forces managed to capture the city. The quiet determination of the British soldiers and sailors, the relentless bombardment, slowly wore down the Spanish defenses. The fall of Havana was not just the loss of a city, it was the loss of a vital strategic port in the Caribbean, a crucial hub for Spain's vast American empire, and a profound blow to Spanish prestige. The quiet murmurs of defeat echoed through the Spanish court. In the same year, far across the Pacific Ocean, another spectacular British victory further crippled Spain's global reach. British forces captured Manila, the capital of the Philippines. This daring expedition, a testament to Britain's ability to project power across immense distances, effectively stripped Spain of its most important footholds in the Pacific. The quiet surrender of the city, the raising of the Union Jack over its ancient walls, marked a significant expansion of British influence into a region previously dominated by Spain. The Franco-Spanish alliance, though conceived with grand ambitions, ultimately collapsed under the relentless pressure of British naval dominance. The combined might of the Bourbon powers proved insufficient to counter Britain's global reach and its highly effective naval strategy. The quiet confidence that had led to the family compact was replaced by the somber reality of significant territorial losses and shattered imperial dreams. The 7 Years' War, now reaching its final, quiet stages, had irrevocably shifted the global balance, with Britain emerging as the undisputed master of the seas and a truly global empire. After years of relentless warfare, of continents aflame and oceans boiling with cannon smoke, the quiet, weary desire for peace finally prevailed. The year 1763 brought with it not the roar of battle, but the rustle of official documents and the measured voices of diplomats, gathered to redraw the map of a world profoundly changed. 2 landmark treaties, each reflecting the complex, intertwined nature of the conflict, formally brought an end to the 7 Years' War, setting the stage for a new global order. The quiet dignity of these negotiations masked the immense suffering that had preceded them. The first of these agreements, the Treaty of Hubertusburg, was signed on February 15, 1763. This treaty specifically addressed the European conflict, the long and brutal struggle that had pitted Prussia against Austria, Russia, and the Holy Roman Empire. The negotiations, likely held in hushed tones behind closed doors, focused on restoring a semblance of the old balance, even if the underlying power dynamics had irrevocably shifted. Remarkably, despite the immense bloodshed and the near annihilation of Prussia, the borders of Central Europe largely remained unchanged. Prussia retained Silesia, the very territory whose loss had ignited Austria's fury and its desire for revenge. Austria, after years of relentless effort and untold casualties, was finally forced to recognize Prussia's permanent possession of Silesia. The quiet acceptance of this outcome, though painful for Vienna, brought an end to the core European dispute. The treaty affirmed Prussia's emergence as a major power, its survival against overwhelming odds, a testament to Frederick's genius and the resilience of his kingdom. Just 5 days earlier, on February 10, 1763, the Treaty of Paris had been signed, a monumental agreement that reshaped the colonial world and formally concluded the global dimensions of the war. This was the treaty where Britain, the undisputed victor on the global stage, solidified its immense gains. France, humbled and financially ruined, was forced to cede vast territories to its rival, Canada, the jewel of New France, along with all French lands east of the Mississippi River, were transferred to British control. The quiet transfer of allegiance, the unfurling of new flags over distant forts and settlements, marked a profound shift in the geopolitical landscape of North America. France's grand dreams of a vast North American empire were shattered, reduced to a whisper of what might have been. Spain, which had reluctantly entered the war on the side of France, also suffered significant losses, though it managed to recover some key territories. In exchange for the return of Havana and Manila, two vital colonial possessions captured by the British during the war. Spain ceded Florida to Britain. The quiet exchange of these territories reflected the power dynamics at the negotiating table, a careful balancing act to ensure some semblance of stability. The cumulative effect of these treaties was clear and undeniable. Britain, through its naval supremacy, its colonial conquests, and its strategic victories, was confirmed as the world's foremost global empire. The quiet hum of its trade routes, the vastness of its territorial holdings, now spanned the globe, touching every continent. The map of the world, painstakingly redrawn in the quiet rooms of diplomacy, clearly showed the ascendancy of British power. The 7 Years' War had ended not with a bang, but with a series of quiet agreements that formalized a new imperial age. An age where Britain stood preeminent, its influence cast across the entire world. When the ink dried on the treaties of Hubertusburg and Paris in 1763, the cannons fell silent, and the flags of victory were unfurled. Yet the true cost of the 7 Years' War lingered, a quiet, heavy burden on every nation involved. No participant, whether victor or vanquished, emerged from the conflict truly unscathed. The peace brought not an end to suffering, but a new chapter of reckoning, a quiet assessment of the immense human and financial toll that would shape the future of continents. The world breathed a collective sigh of relief, but it was a sigh tinged with profound exhaustion and deep wounds. For Prussia, the miracles of survival had come at an almost unbearable price. An estimated 180,000 Prussian soldiers had perished, their quiet sacrifice leaving countless families shattered and communities scarred. The very fabric of its society was torn. Its economy, once burgeoning, lay utterly devastated. Fields lay fallow, towns were in ruins, and the treasury was empty. Prussia emerged from the war heavily indebted to Britain, a quiet, constant reminder of the financial lifeline that had sustained its survival. The peace, though glorious in its affirmation of Silesia, was a hollow victory in the face of such profound internal devastation, a quiet echo of the immense cost of its defiance. Austria, which had desperately sought to reclaim Silesia, bore an even greater human cost, with over 700,000 casualties from its vast, multi-ethnic empire. The sheer scale of its losses, the quiet despair in so many homes, was staggering. Though it failed to achieve its primary war aim, the war forced Austria into a period of introspection and vital reform. The quiet necessity of change prompted a deep military and bureaucratic overhaul, a recognition that the old ways could no longer compete with the efficiency of Prussia. These reforms, born of defeat, would subtly reshape the Habsburg monarchy for decades to come. A quiet transformation forged in the fires of war. France, the grand power that had challenged Britain for global supremacy, emerged from the war not only defeated, but truly broken, stripped of its vast colonial holdings in North America and India, and humiliated on the seas. Its prestige plummeted. More critically, the immense financial burden of the war pushed the kingdom into bankruptcy. The quiet ticking of debt, the growing resentment among its populace over the lavish court and the crippling taxes, began to plant the seeds of a revolution that would erupt just a few decades later. The quiet whispers of discontent, the growing anger, would ultimately sweep away the old order. Russia, though technically a victor in the European conflict, having pushed Prussia to the brink, gained surprisingly little in terms of territory or direct influence from the peace treaties. The sudden withdrawal under Peter III had curtailed its gains. The internal politics of the empire remained turbulent, and Peter III himself was soon overthrown by his formidable wife, Catherine II, just months after the peace. The quiet machinations of court intrigue, the shifting allegiances, ensured that even a victorious Russia found itself in a period of significant internal transition, its external gains somewhat muted by internal upheaval. Even Spain, which had joined the war late and suffered immediate colonial losses, recognized the necessity for change. The disastrous loss of Havana and Manila, and the clear demonstration of British naval superiority prompted a quiet resolve to modernize its navy and army. This period of reform, born of humiliation, marked a subtle but significant shift in Spanish imperial policy, a recognition that the world had changed and new strategies were required to protect its vast but vulnerable empire. Every victor, it seemed, emerged from the 7 Years' War weakened in some fundamental way. The triumph was often shadowed by crushing debts, immense casualties, and the unsettling quiet of societal disruption. The peace of 1763 was not a celebration of unblemished glory, but a somber acknowledgement of a world forever altered, its nations profoundly scarred by the quiet, pervasive burden of prolonged global conflict. With the signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1763, the quiet transfer of sovereignty in North America from France to Britain left a profound and unsettling void. While European empires might have redrawn their maps in distant palaces, the reality on the ground, particularly for the Native American tribes who had long aligned with the French, was far more complex and perilous. The British, now the undisputed colonial power, swiftly began to enforce new, often harsher, policies in the newly acquired territories, especially towards the indigenous peoples. The quiet understanding that had characterized French-native relations, a delicate balance of trade and diplomacy, was abruptly replaced by a more authoritarian, less accommodating British approach. This sudden shift, the quiet imposition of new rules by a distant power, ignited a fierce and widespread resistance. Chief Pontiac, a powerful and influential leader of the Ottawa tribe, emerged as a unifying force. With quiet determination and strategic vision, he galvanized numerous Great Lakes tribes, including the Ottawa, Ojibwa, Potawatomi, and Huron, among others. His message was one of unity and defiance, a call to resist the encroaching tide of British settlement and policy. The quiet rustle of messages carried through the forests. The shared resolve among diverse nations created a powerful new coalition. In the spring of 1763, this unified Native American force launched a series of coordinated attacks against British forts and settlements across the vast Great Lakes region and the Ohio Valley. Forts Detroit and Pitt, vital strategic outposts, found themselves besieged, their garrisons trapped and fighting desperately for survival. The quiet daily life of the frontier was shattered by sudden raids, the cries of battle, and the smoke of burning cabins. Pontiac's War, as it became known, was not a single, isolated skirmish, but a widespread frontier uprising that spread like wildfire across the entire region. The sound of distant war cries and the smell of wood smoke became a terrifying reality for colonists and soldiers alike. Britain responded with characteristic brutality, deploying military forces to crush the rebellion and employing scorched earth tactics. The quiet devastation of retaliation, the grim toll on Native American communities, was immense. However, the sheer scale and tenacity of Pontiac's resistance forced the British Crown to reconsider its approach. In a significant, albeit politically pragmatic, move, the British government issued the Royal Proclamation of 1763. This proclamation was a quiet, yet monumental declaration. It effectively banned all British colonial settlement west of the Appalachian Mountains. The vast lands beyond this natural barrier were reserved for Native American territories, a recognition, however reluctant, of their claims. While intended to prevent further conflict with indigenous peoples, the Royal Proclamation had another, unintended consequence. It infuriated the American colonists. Their quiet, simmering desire for westward expansion, a fundamental aspect of their burgeoning identity, was abruptly curtailed by a distant crown. The proclamation became a symbol of perceived British tyranny, a quiet source of resentment that would fuel future conflict between the colonies and the mother country. The echoes of Pontiac's War, therefore, resonated far beyond the immediate battlefields, quietly planting seeds of dissent that would, in time, contribute to a much larger revolutionary storm. The quiet agreements of 1763 meant to usher in an era of peace. Instead, unveiled a new set of challenges that would profoundly reshape the relationship between Britain and its burgeoning American colonies. The immense financial burden of the 7 Years' War, while securing global dominance, left Britain with staggering debts. To repay these vast sums, the British government began to impose new taxes and tighter regulations on its colonies. A quiet, yet persistent, fiscal pressure that would soon ignite widespread resentment. The rustle of new tax forms, the quiet enforcement of unpopular duties, became symbols of a growing discontent. The colonists, who had contributed soldiers and resources to the war effort, felt increasingly marginalized and exploited. They argued that they had no direct representation in the British Parliament, and therefore, Parliament had no right to tax them. The rallying cry, "No taxation without representation," emerged from this quiet indignation, becoming a powerful articulation of their growing grievances. It was a simple phrase, yet it carried the weight of profound constitutional and philosophical disagreements, a quiet challenge to the authority of the crown. The quiet debates in colonial taverns and town halls, the impassioned speeches, slowly began to lay the groundwork for a revolutionary future. Meanwhile, in India, another profound imperial aftershock was felt. The British East India Company, having secured victory at Plassey and Wandiwash, moved to consolidate its power. In 1764, at the Battle of Buxar, the company decisively defeated a combined army of the Nawab of Awadh, the Mughal emperor, and the Nawab of Bengal. This victory was even more strategically significant than Plassey, as it was a more conventional military triumph. As a result, the British East India Company was granted the Diwani, or the right to collect revenue. In Bengal, this quiet legalistic change was, in effect, a transfer of sovereignty, allowing the company to assume direct administrative control over a vast and wealthy region. This new power marked a dramatic shift. The British East India Company, no longer just a trading entity, began to systematically drain the local wealth of Bengal. The quiet, relentless extraction of resources, the imposition of new taxes and monopolies, severely impacted the local economy and traditional industries. The vibrant tapestry of Bengal's prosperity began to fray under the relentless pressure of colonial exploitation. The quiet flow of wealth from India to Britain represented a fundamental imbalance in power. The consequences of this rapacious exploitation were tragically amplified by nature. From 1769 to 1770, Bengal experienced a devastating famine. The company's policies, focused on maximizing revenue even during times of scarcity, exacerbated the crisis, preventing effective relief efforts. Millions of people perished, a staggering loss of life that stands as one of the war's most horrific and often unseen consequences. The quiet, desperate cries of hunger, the silent toll of disease, haunted the land, a grim testament to the unchecked power of the company. These events in India, though geographically distant from the American colonies, were interconnected, revealing the quiet, often brutal, mechanics of a global empire. The aftershocks of the 7 Years' War resonated across continents, creating new forms of oppression and laying the groundwork for future conflicts and profound human suffering. The 7 Years' War, a conflict born from quiet tensions and erupting into global fury, concluded with treaties. But its true ending was not found in signed documents. Instead, it was etched into the very fabric of the world, shaping the destinies of empires and peoples for centuries to come. It was a war that, with quiet finality, closed one chapter of history and opened another, ushering in a truly new age of global interactions and imperial ambition. The echoes of its distant battles continued to resonate, subtly altering the course of human events. Britain emerged from this immense struggle as the dominant naval and colonial power, a position it would hold with quiet confidence for generations. Its vast network of colonies, its control over vital trade routes, and its unparalleled naval might establish an undisputed global hegemony. The quiet hum of its trading ships circling the globe, the reach of its influence into every corner, bespoke a new era of imperial ascendancy. The British Empire, forged in the crucible of this war, truly became an empire on which the sun never set. In Central Europe, Prussia, against all odds, rose from near annihilation to become a formidable military force. a quiet and undeniable power. Its survival and the genius of Frederick the Great laid the enduring foundation for a future unified Germany. The discipline, efficiency, and resilience demonstrated by the Prussian army would become hallmarks of German military tradition. The quiet, disciplined rhythm of its barracks, the unyielding focus on military excellence, set it apart. France, on the other hand, collapsed into a profound state of debt and widespread discontent. Stripped of its colonial glory and facing eternal financial ruin, the seeds of the French Revolution were irrevocably planted. The quiet murmurs of discontent grew louder, the calls for change more insistent, ultimately leading to the radical upheaval of 1789. The war had not merely defeated France, it had fundamentally destabilized its old regime, paving the road for a new, revolutionary era. Russia and Austria, though playing significant roles, turned inward to reform and consolidate their power. The quiet necessity of adaptation, the realization that old methods were insufficient, spurred both empires into periods of internal restructuring, leading to what historians would term the enlightened absolutist era. These internal transformations, though less dramatic than revolutions, quietly reshaped their governance and societal structures, modernizing their states from within. Finally, the vast, rich lands of India and the wild, promising territories of North America became the primary theaters of a new, aggressive form of modern imperialism. The war fundamentally altered their trajectory, subjecting them to intensified European control and exploitation. The quiet, inexorable spread of European power into these regions, the imposition of foreign rule and economic systems, marked a profound and lasting transformation, setting the stage for centuries of colonial domination and resistance. The 7 Years' War, therefore, was far more than a mere conflict over territories. It was the definitive moment that shattered the old feudal order of Europe and decisively ushered in the first true age of global empire. The quiet turning of the tide, the profound and irreversible shifts in power and ideology, would echo through the succeeding centuries, shaping the modern world in ways that few could have imagined when those first boots sank into wet soil. And perhaps, as the world drifted into this new age, the quiet question remained when the whole world becomes the battlefield. Which empire truly wins, and what is the cost of such a victory?